Hi, and welcome to Acrylic Landscape Overpainting Part 2, or as they call it, just painting. So the section I'm working on right now, two of the things that I'm grappling with are color and composition. And those are two things that you pretty much always grapple with when you set out to do a landscape painting. Landscape painting in particular is flexible in terms of what you can do with the elements you see for composition. You can move them where you want them to be, you can set up a deliberate focal point, you can eliminate things, you can edit as you need to. And two of the things that I was really drawn to for this source photo were those yellow trees and the pine trees that continue both along the edge of the water. So as I'm painting this section, what I'm trying to figure out is not only how I'm going to balance my color, but also how I'm going to move things around to maximize the composition. To that end, there were two important things to consider. One was the grouping of the shapes and forms, and two was the rhythm of the tops of the trees. So those are two things that I'm going to think about as I place those trees and bushes. But the first thing I had to do was block in that stretch of land behind them, because you don't want to just jump to the good stuff, but forget about what's behind them. Eventually you will have to go in and do that. Then you have to fuss around the stuff you've already painted, which is a real pain in the neck. So don't set yourself up for that. Work background to foreground. It's really, really the way to work, I've found, with very little exception. So as I'm blocking in that chunk of land there, what I did before I started to paint was mix up the colors I needed on my palette. So I had a fair amount of the colors I needed. And I stayed light for value, but I changed my color up because there's a lot going on in that slope. Didn't need to catch it all, but I wanted to catch that texture and the variation of warm and cool tones. Whenever you're painting green, you will almost always find that there is warm tones in there. You have to look for them because if you make assumptions about what's happening with the greens, it's going to be too green. Look for the warm tones. They're almost always there, even in springtime, maybe especially in springtime. No, especially in the fall. Anyway, they're always there. Look for them. The green that I'm working with, not super happy with that. Happier with that than the sort of pinkish tone that's there. That is because I'm working with rose madder instead of alizarin crimson. And that's just because of the paint set that I'm working with. I'm working with that paint set because you, my students, are also working with that paint set. And I wanted to be able to recreate what it is that you're doing so that you would know what was possible with those paints, those paint colors. Okay, I've got most of that blocked in back there, with the exception of the little trees that dot up here and there on that slope. I can get to those later if I want to, because those don't overlap with stuff directly in front of them, that tree line. And I really wanted to get to that tree line at this point. What I really want to make sure that I capture is that nice dark edge that is the shadow of the land as it hits the water. Partly it's also the shadow of the trees. That dark edge combines with the shadow of the trees to create one long continuous shape, again, visually tying everything together. I liked how that horizontal line echoed the line in the background, that horizontal tree line in the background. Look for commonalities of shape and color when you choose a composition. Don't just be drawn to the beautiful landscapes that are so complicated. I feel like that's one of the classic blunders of beginning landscape painting, is that you get seduced by these beautiful scenes and they're just too complicated based on skill level or practice level. Stay simple at first until you really have your legs under you. And then you can do, expand gradually as you feel ready. Don't set yourself up for disappointment by choosing something that's going to be way too complex at first. And, if you are drawn to that beautiful scene, simplify it. Don't try to do it as you see it. What I'm doing right now is I'm going in with the sienna brown. It's really making a difference back there. And that's why I mentioned cheating before. Cheating because the sienna brown is not actually in the set that you're using. But this is also a painting that I might like to keep, so I needed to make it work for me, so I threw that in there. Okay, sorry about that visual jump there. I am still learning how to edit and shoot effectively with film. I'll get it eventually. Here's the really good stuff. For me, as a painter, is going in and doing something like those highlights in the pine trees back there to give them a little bit of volume. Not fussing over them. It felt almost as fast as it looks right now, sped up 4 times, but getting just 2 tones on a tree in a background can do wonders to give it volume. And what I did for that green is I started with a really bright green, the phthalo and the lemon, and then I dirtied it up with that darker green that I already had on my palette for that line of pine trees. And it worked great. I find that the simpler you can be with your color mixing, the better off you're going to be for a couple of reasons. One, because you're less likely to get mud, and two, because you're more likely to remember what you did. It's really hard to remember, for me anyway, more than 3 colors in a combination when you're mixing to get a color that you want. Color mixing comes with a lot of practice. I was really, really bad at it when I first started, and I feel like I still have a really long way to go. It's a steep learning curve, so give yourself time to learn it and be patient with yourself. That's really important when you're painting. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. If you end up liking at least part of a painting when you get to the end of it, you're on the right path. I'm going to repeat that a lot probably, but it's a really important idea. Okay, getting more of those yellow trees in there. Again, I'm thinking about the rhythm, going in a bit of a triangular shape, going from the top of that leftmost tree, the yellow-orange one, coming down to where I'm at in the middle of the picture, and then coming back up towards the right-hand side, but not as tall as I started with, because that would be too statically symmetrical. Using some of that sienna brown to get those shadows in there on the left-hand side. I find with something like a tree or a bush, it's better to work really broadly at first. Don't fuss. Don't try to draw and paint the individual leaves. You will drive yourself bananas. Look for the broad shapes in the composition. The whole composition, but then also within the individual forms you're trying to depict. Right now, those big bushy yellow trees only have 2 or 3 values on them, and the form is starting to come out. So stay simple with your color as well, with your values. Again, sorry about that visual jump. I'll get it eventually. And those dark greens, again, are going to combine with that dark line underneath along the water's edge and create one long continuous shape. Weaving in, almost literally, the way the color translates, weaving in with that yellow, because I wanted that to bring you into the foreground, because that yellow appears in the foreground as well. Okay, not the exact same yellow, looking at the source photo, but close enough where I'm going to use that as my base color and then maybe make it a little more rusty. Just blocking in a couple of highlights on those pine trees. A couple of highlights also on the yellow-orange trees. Highlights are super fun. All right, that's about going to do it for the middle ground. Before I get to the real foreground, what I'm going to do is just block in a little bit of a combination of white and cerulean for that water. See you next time. Happy painting.